So I want to talk about Teofimo Lopez, giving you that boxing philosophy perspective. So let's open that door and discuss 9 ideas. And the first idea is that Teo is coming off a comprehensive and lopsided loss to Shakur Stevenson, who looks like is an elite fighter, a great fighter. But now he's immediately stepping in with a live dog in Rolly Romero. And perhaps you don't see that very often in modern boxing. You know, and that speaks to the psychological makeup of Teo. It really does. I remember when Floyd beat Canelo convincingly. He beat him convincingly. But Canelo came back, and he came back to be an elite boxer. Before Floyd, he was a good boxer, but then he became an elite boxer. Why is this important? Because people can come back from defeats. Think of Lennox Lewis when he lost to Hassim Rahman. Think of Evander Holyfield when he lost to Riddick Bowe. Think of Sugar Ray Leonard when he lost to Roberto Duran in the first fight. And when you look at Teo versus Shakur Stevenson, to me, the main issue was the lack of making effective adjustments. There was a lack of making effective adjustments. And this is part of ring IQ. And it was so surprising because from my perspective, in certain performances from Teo, he illustrates that he's an intelligent boxer, that he has high ring IQ. Now, the good thing is that this can be corrected in camp. It can be corrected. And a good question, maybe, is how did the fight against Shakur Stevenson, how did that loss affect his mindset? Will it make him stronger? Or will it create doubt? And I guess every fighter is psychologically different. And the evidence of how that fight with Shakur Stevenson, how it impacts Teo will be highlighted in a significant way against Rolly Romero. And I guess it's important to remember that a loss can create doubt, but with the right adjustments, it can also become an education. So with that being said, Teo can make the adjustments, but is he getting the right education in this camp? Only time will tell. And then the next idea is that, people believe that, Teo doesn't duck smoke, and he never has. He ran straight at Lomachenko, figuratively speaking, when others pretended they couldn't pronounce his name. And in a sense, what does that say about Teo? It says that Teo has the mentality of a real fighter. And I guess you can ask the question, what is a real fighter? Because by definition, anyone who steps in the ring is a real fighter. But there's different calibers of fighters. There's average fighters, good fighters, great fighters, elite fighters, etc. And there's different mentalities. Some do it just for the money. Some do it more for the glory. And some will do anything to protect their zero. While others will be like, if he's the best, I want to fight him. And maybe that's the distinction of what is a real fighter. In this sense, Teo does not walk away from the fire. He walks towards it. That's a psychology. And I would say, the question is, what is Teo as a boxer? How can we frame Teo as a boxer? And I think you can partly frame him as an intelligent boxer. But ironically, when he fought Shakur Stevenson, he did not look like an intelligent boxer. And the question is, why? Were there variables to that performance? Or, simply put, is Shakur Stevenson just that elite? Or were there other factors involved? Were there other factors involved with regards to camp, the relationship with the trainer, sparring, nutrition, etc., etc., etc.? But regardless of the variables or lack of variables, and regardless of the performance against Shakur Stevenson, regardless of all of that context, what we can establish is that Teo does not walk away from challenges. And in modern day boxing, that is a very important currency. And when we try to clarify this, we can say that a real fighter does not avoid the fire. They don't avoid the fire. He develops the tools to survive inside it. And then the next idea here is that he beat Lomachenko by outboxing him for 6 rounds, a masterclass. Then rallying when Loma inevitably came on late. If he never did anything else, if Teo never did anything else, he showed that that night he was a great fighter because he beat a great fighter. He beat an elite fighter. But the question becomes, is he still a great fighter? Maybe there's a better question. Why was he so good that night? Why was Teo so good that night? Was it the preparation? Was it the drills? Because every fighter has different drills. Was it the sparring? Was it the strategy? Was it the psychology? Was it the hunger? Or maybe it's a combination of all those things. From Teo's perspective, it's important to know why you're optimal. Perhaps from the team's perspective, it's important to know why you're optimal. Simple analogy. If a bodybuilder, if you get a bodybuilder and they develop a bigger and better and more defined chest by doing incline, then maybe they need to do more incline. So if it's a hunger issue, then let's create an environment to rediscover that hunger. If it's a strategy issue, then let's get back to that strategic space. So in a sense, it's not always good to be emotional to solve a problem. Sometimes you have to be stoic, you have to be reflective. Look at your best performance, study why it was such a great performance, and then try to replicate, not necessarily the performance, but replicate the environment around that performance. Because inevitably, when you prepare for a boxing match, there's always these nuanced variables, whether it be, the sparring partners, whether it be the actual physical environment, whether it be the mentality, the things that you're reading, the people around you, etc. So sometimes rediscovering greatness starts with understanding what created it in the first place. And then the next idea, and this is quite an emotional one, is the father-son conversation. Is that the real fight? Is that the real fight? Teo chose a public podcast. He chose a public podcast, which is in a sense a public platform, to say what he couldn't say privately. And his father still refused to take accountability, or that was the overwhelming reception from the public. And his father is still refusing to take accountability, allegedly. Obviously, people's opinions can change. What they say in front of the camera may be different what they say behind the camera, figuratively speaking. But lack of accountability, what does it do? What does a lack of accountability do? It can kill many things, figuratively speaking. It can kill businesses. It can kill friendships, collaborations, partnerships, and it can destroy a father-trainer relationship. And I think that's why accountability is so important. Can there be accountability, or can there be development if there is no accountability? In anything, a professional relationship, a romantic relationship, a personal friendship, etc. Because without accountability, the same problem can survive every conversation designed to solve it. And I guess this is something that his father needs to come to that realization. This isn't about a lack of love. This is maybe about a lack of perspective, or maybe some type of trauma, who knows? And the next idea is that, and this leans into the criticism. Where's your power? Where's this? Where's that? While bleeding in the ring, while Teo was bleeding in the ring against Shakur, Teo's corner was talking him down instead of giving him instruction. And why does his father coach him like a critic, not a trainer? Now let's be clear here. Criticism can be a clever tactic if used properly. So if you use it properly, criticism for some boxers, remember every boxer has a different psychology, criticism can bring people out of themselves. Remember, you're trying to make someone be the best version of themselves. But maybe what's more empowering in most situations is telling your boxer what he needs to do. And there can be so many different type of advice, so many different type of advice. For example, you could say, throw more jabs. That's an obvious one. Jab to the chest. Step to the right. Why? Step to the right to take away the right hand, create the new angle. Maybe change the trajectory of the right hand. Throw it to the chest. Maybe you should throw it through the target. Maybe double the jab. Maybe a double counter jab. Maybe you say put the head on the chest in the pocket. Maybe you say increase the tempo. Maybe you say double feint with the left, then throw the right hand, etc., etc., etc. Of course, there are so many instructions you can give, and they all can create different outcomes. And of course, you would say just one or two of those things. You wouldn't say all of that, because that would be absolute overwhelm. The point here is it's about lifting your fighter and giving them the appropriate instructions to be able. You want to give them the instructions that enable them to adapt. So you need to download the problem, understand what the problem is, identify the solution, and then communicate it concisely with your fighter. An alternative tactic is focus on the opponent's weakness. Instead of telling, your fighter how tired they look, tell them how tired the opponent is. Again, that's a psychological ploy. What is the purpose? Again, the purpose is to bring the best out of your fighter. If your fighter is feeling tired or maybe psychologically low, if you tell them that the opponent is tired, maybe that gives them a lift. So this is all about giving effective instructions and understanding the science and the mastery of working the corner effectively. And in a sense, the corner should not simply identify the problem. Its job is to give the fighter the solution. And then the next idea here is that Bill Haney is the standard they keep measuring against. He took ownership when Devin lost to Ryan Garcia. I remember that fight clearly. Ryan Garcia was amazing with the left hook in that fight. And of course, there was the controversy. And what they say here is that they don't see the same from the father. They don't see the same from Mr. Lopez. Again, it's about the importance of accountability. Think of this. Is there trust with no accountability? Because if there's no accountability, you're not accountable for anything that you say. And if you're not accountable for anything you say, you can simply say anything. Now, on a separate note, I'm wondering what accountability Bill Haney took. And shout out to Bill Haney, because he's done an amazing job with Devon. But from my understanding, from my recollection, the main emphasis was the criticism of Garcia with regards to the controversy. But what I will say about Bill Haney is that he always stands next to his son proudly. And that is honorable. And he's also great at marketing. And clearly he understands the science and the mastery of boxing. So big respect to Bill Haney. But with regards to the Teo situation and his father specifically, this may be a psychological issue. The flaw is obvious. The flaw is lack of accountability, but the correlation or the correction only happens when that person is ready. Why does the father not take accountability? Maybe he feels devalued, and maybe those feelings are justified. Maybe his psychological makeup does not allow himself to be vulnerable, depending on where he grew up, his generation, etc. Accountability can leave someone vulnerable. Maybe other people need to take accountability as well. Maybe it's not just him. It's important, however, despite all of this nuance and despite all of this context, that Teo has a great camp. He needs a great camp, great structure, great discipline, and ultimately he needs clarity, because that is what was lacking, or it looks like that was what was lacking from the Shakur Stevenson performance. And there's a philosophical point to make here. Accountability requires vulnerability, but without vulnerability, there may be no meaningful correction. And then the next idea is that, this is your career. Your dad had his life, and that to me sounds really harsh, and I'm quoting there, that's not my words. This is your career. Your dad had his life. Is Teo fighting for his own future, or is he fighting to make his father proud? Here's a perspective. At the end of the day, that's his dad. And not only is it his dad, it's his trainer. That's a relationship that has tremendous value to him. And the question may be, can that relationship be optimized through the funnel of boxing? And the question is, if the relationship affects your boxing career, if it's affecting your boxing career, do you have to make a tough decision which may not be favorable to your dad? And it's not, perhaps it's the way you do it. If you have to make that tough decision, maybe you don't have to make that tough decision. Maybe there's some amendments that can be made. And considering the success that you had with your father, maybe he should be given the benefit of the doubt. But remember, and this is the emotional part, your dad will always be your dad. Your boxing career, no matter how far you go up that mountain, it will come and it will go. But your dad is still your dad. The point is, even difficult decisions can be handled with dignity and compassion. And perhaps they should be handled with dignity and compassion. Because maybe there is a other solution. Maybe he could be in a co-trainer relationship. Maybe the dad needs some time to reflect on not just the boxing element, but also the personal and emotional element. And it's funny because at a point, boxing careers end, but family remains. So even difficult decisions, they should be made with dignity. That's important. And then the next idea is that the fix everyone circle. So in a sense, what we have here is keep dad for the bond, but bring in someone else additionally for the craft. So can Teo split the emotional father from the professional trainer without losing either? I think it's important here. It's important to recognize that the father does have expertise in boxing, because if you're just keeping him on just because, that's demeaning his accomplishments and that's demeaning his experience. He has expertise. Let's acknowledge his expertise. He may have some difficulties. He may have some troubles. He's a human being. We all have troubles. We all have difficulties. But let's acknowledge his expertise. But maybe there needs to be a new set of eyes to enhance that relationship. And when I say that relationship, it's about Teo having a great performance against Rolly Romero. That's what's important within the boxing context. So it's about enhancing the boxing. So in a sense, here what we have is that sometimes protecting a relationship means changing its role rather than ending it. And that's not just a compassionate decision. That's an intelligent decision. Because let's remember, the father brought so much to the table. He brought so much to the table. Yes, there's been some recent problems, but maybe we can work, maybe they can work through those problems. And then the final idea is that Teo allegedly is a loner. He doesn't have a squad. His father is his entire support system, which is exactly why he can't cut him loose. Now, here's a personal perspective. And again, this perspective may be wrong, but let me land this plane. I think boxing camps should have individual systems. And of course, one of the biggest variables here is money. But let's assume that there's enough money. Then I think that you should have individual systems. Let me explain. So those systems would be maybe a co-trainer, so 2 trainers instead of 1. Strength and conditioning, someone who specializes in strength and conditioning. When you're talking about the lower weights, definitely a dietitian, and preferably you want the best of the best. You want great sparring partners that can replicate your opponent. You want perhaps, and this might be an additional extra, people that specialize with the boxing mitts, because there are different ways to hit the mitts, and some people have a specialty in optimizing optimizing a fighter. And also, and this might be controversial, where necessary, a sports psychologist. From my understanding, Carl Froch benefited immensely from hiring a sports psychologist in his rematch against George Groves. Now, each piece, whether it's the training, whether it's the strength conditioning, whether it's the dietitian, whether it's the sparring partners, whether it's the, the training with the mitts, whether it's the sports psychologist, each piece has its own form of mastery if done on an elite level. So if one person does the vast majority of the work, think of this: what happens if they become sick? What happens if they become overworked, if they become extremely tired, extremely stressed, and unable to function optimally? So again, it's a perspective. And again, my perspective may be wrong, but I think great fighters, they need strong systems, because relying on one person creates a single point of failure. So here are 8 essential questions with regards to Teo. Question number 1. Is Teofimo's loss to Shakur a sign of decline, or simply a lesson he can correct in camp? Now, my first impression is that perhaps it's both. Perhaps it's a sign of decline, but that doesn't mean it's something that he can't correct in camp. I think Shakur Stevenson is an elite fighter with elite reflexes. So when I analyze the fight and I analyze the pedigree of Shakur, I don't think it's necessarily a sign of decline. I think it's more of a reflection of just how good or how great Shakur Stevenson is. So that's the first part. And Teofimo, when we see him against other boxers, he looks incredible. But he looked very ordinary against Shakur. But does that mean Teo's ordinary, or is Shakur exceptional? At this point in time, I think Shakur is simply exceptional, or he was exceptional on that night. He was ready. Can he correct the mistake? Well, first, one has to identify the mistake. To me, the mistake was not making enough adjustments. It's almost like he boxed with a boxer, that didn't work, and then he was unable to make effective adjustments. He did do some things. He did a lot of feinting, but it wasn't effective feinting. He did some body work, but not enough body work. He changed southpaw to try and give a different angle on the backhand every now and then. He didn't do enough of that and wasn't innovative enough from that position. So there's definitely things that can be corrected in camp, but it's important that they actually identify what the problems are and implement the solutions. Now remember, there's a difference between Shakur and Rolly Romero. So this should be a different fight. In a sense, many would say that Teo is more technical than Rolly Romero. However, I think Rolly would probably disagree with those assertions. The second question is, what actually made Teo so effective against Lomachenko, and can he recreate that version of himself? Again, I spoke about this earlier. It's so important that he returns to that type of form. Were there certain variables? I think the variables was an element of surprise, and that Lomachenko is a slow starter. So I think that's a part of it. But at the end of the day, he beat a great fighter. He beat an elite fighter over 12 rounds. And if he can replicate the adjustments, if he can replicate the speed, the timing, the boxing intelligence, then that version of Teo is very difficult to beat. So yes, you can argue that maybe Lomachenko underestimated Teo, but we should never minimize the greatness of that performance. And like I said, he was great that night, but can he be great again? And that's a great question. And I think part of that question, the answer to that question is going to be, part of answering that question is whether he can be consistent and whether his camp can create an optimal boxing environment. And I think it's possible, but I think it's going to take a tremendous amount of dedication from Teo. And I think his team are going to have to be on their A game to be able to recreate that version. Also, there's the hunger. What is Teo's hunger from 1 to 10 or 1 to 100? When he fought Lomachenko, his hunger was probably at 100. Where is it now? Is it Is it 70? Is it 60? Or is it 80? And if it is at a 60 or a 70, can he push the scale to get it to 80, 90, or back to 100? Because there's all these variables that need to be optimum for him to recreate that form. Question number 3. Does walking towards difficult fights make Teo a real fighter even when the results go against him? I think the answer to that is yes, because I think many great fighters will just simply fight anyone. And I think that's a recipe of many great fighters. So, and that's something that stands out about Teo, is that he's not avoiding challenges. And that's a great trait. And that's something that we like to see in fighters. Question number 4. Can a trainer criticize a fighter effectively, or should the corner always prioritize solutions? That's such a good question. A trainer needs to understand the psychology of their fighter. If criticizing your fighter makes your fighter more optimum, then you should criticize. If simply pointing out solutions optimizes your fighter, then you should simply do that. In simple terms, you might have a fighter that negates the jab, and he's negating the jab because he's emotionally invested and he's making that simple mistake. And then you could just say to him, look, you need to pick up your jab. And if he follows that instruction, and if that's the right instruction, then that can have a significant impact on the fight. Maybe he needs to throw more feints to be able to land the backhand, etc. But with other fighters, it may not be a technical issue. It may be an emotional issue. So how do you emotionally get them to a point where they can operate at an optimum level? The point is this: it's a case by case basis. And I guess the role of a trainer is to understand the psychology of the fighter, because part of your job is to bring the best out of the fighter. Question number 5. Can trust survive in a father-trainer relationship without accountability? I think it's hard to have any trust if there's no accountability. And it would seem, on camera at least, that the father, and I say this respectively because he obviously has expertise in boxing and he's done a great job with his son, but it seems like this is an avenue where he has struggled. And hopefully he can gain perspective and insight into this, because if he struggles with accountability and he's still involved with the boxing of his son, then this can not only affect the son's boxing, it can also affect their relationships. Hopefully he can work on that. Question 6. Does Teo need to separate his father from the coaching role to protect both his career and his relationship? I personally think that, considering that his father got him to an elite level, that I think that the way to move forward would be maybe to do like a collaboration with another talented trainer. And that trainer not only needs to know boxing, but they also need to be able to communicate concisely, and they need to respect the role of the father. So you need a trainer who has a wealth of experience in not only dealing with fighters, but also dealing with other trainers. And you need someone who can communicate with respect, who can communicate honestly, who can give constructive feedback, and someone that's at the same time having all those elements, someone who's also a strong character. So it's a difficult job, but I think it's essential. I think adding a co-trainer would be beneficial, because what happens, I think, I think Evander Holyfield's a good example. When he fought Tyson, he had Don Turner and he had Tommy Brooks, and they were both were good trainers individually, but then when you combine them both together, you get the benefit of both worlds. And I think Teo could benefit from that. But it's important that the trainers collaborate effectively. So question number 7. Would adding a technical co-trainer give Teo the structure and clarity he currently lacks? Well, when we talk about the structure and clarity that he lacks, it appeared that he lacked structure and clarity against Shakur Stevenson. It does not necessarily mean that he always lacked structure and clarity, because he had structure and clarity against Lomachenko. So this could be an isolated incident, but it's important that if an external person comes in and collaborates with the father, that he attempts to bring the structure and clarity back into the camp. And finally, question 8. Is Teo's biggest problem technical, psychological, or the system around him? Probably a combination of all of those things. But first of all, Teo is a very good technical fighter. So any adjustments, it's just about improving the boxing ring IQ. So from 1 to 100, let's say when he's optimum, he's like a 90. But against Shakur, he seemed to be like a 70 and an 80. So it's about getting him back to where he was with regards to his technical skills and with regards to making adjustments when things are going wrong. And that can be corrected in preparation. Though it's a hard thing to do. It's something that's easy to say, but harder in implementation. Psychologically, that's an interesting one. First off, it's important that a fighter understands their psychology. That's the first thing, because you have to understand your psychology, I think, before you can improve it. And of course, your team and your trainers, they should be aids for you to improve your psychology. And if your camp is optimal, your psychology should be improving from week to week. And if the premise that his father is the system, if that's the true premise, then I think that needs to be adjusted accordingly. He needs to have systems. It can't be one person doing everything. You need elite professionals operating at different levels. So you'll have someone who is great at nutrition doing the diet. You have someone who's optimum and great at strength conditioning doing the strength conditioning. You have, a great professional with the right certifications and the right experience who's the sports psychologist. So I think if you change the systems things effectively, then you could bring out a different fighter. That could be the one change that could bring the best version of Teofimo Lopez. Quick announcement. I have a free chapter from my boxing book. So click the link below to visit the landing page and get your free chapter. Remember to check your spam/junk folder if you don't receive it. Also, let me know what you think. Constructive feedback is always welcome.